Hey everyone, and welcome to the Daily Dose. My name is Maddie, and I am a minister at Calvary. We're so glad that you're joining us today, as this week we are talking all about boundaries. And speaking of boundaries, I have invited you into my home today to film, and that is because I am about to have a baby. So I've started to kind of quarantine myself to take care of my family and my new baby that is on the way. So that's a boundary that I have set up to keep my family safe and healthy. So today we're going to be talking about what boundaries look like. And yesterday we talked about why boundaries are important and what God has to say about them. And now we're going to talk about what boundaries look like and how God has helped us to set up boundaries in our lives. So the first thing that we need to consider when we're setting up boundaries is to ask ourselves some simple questions. Whenever we're in a situation, a new relationship, a high stakes conversation where we think maybe boundaries would be good to bring into this space, we want to ask ourselves a couple of questions. We want to ask ourselves, where do we begin and where do we end? Another thing we could ask is, what in this space is me and what is not me? Or another question we could ask is, what is my responsibility and what is someone else's responsibility in this space? Those are good questions that can help us set the tone to know what our boundaries are so that we can articulate them or carry them out. So this is important because in John 17:11, again we hear this description of the Christian community that we hear all over the New Testament, that we are one. So as Christian people, we are designed to be one body. But this doesn't necessarily mean that we take on each other. It means that we're responsible to each other, to love, to serve, to cherish our neighbor, but not to take on their burdens or their cross to bear. So today we're going to be talking about a couple of different types of boundaries that there are, and these are just a few. It's not an exhaustive list, but it kind of get the conversation started. So the first one I want to talk about is actually our bodies, our skin. So something amazing to think about, and as I'm about to have a little baby, is that babies come into this world thinking that their body is a part of their mother or caregiver's body. They don't know where their body begins and where their body ends. But soon in life, they begin to realize that their body is different than their mothers or their caregivers. They figure out that differentiation. So knowing where our body ends is really helpful in knowing what you have control over and what you don't have control over. Another one that is really important that we talk about is words. We can set boundaries with our words. Brene Brown says something so great that is so good in setting limits and setting up boundaries. And she says that clear is kind. So when we use clear language to dictate what our boundaries are, it is kind. It's kind to ourselves, it's kind to our neighbors to use clear language. And in this type of boundary setting, sometimes the word no is the most important word that we can use. Another type of boundary that we can set up for ourselves is truth. And this one's a little more complicated, but knowing truth about yourself or about God or about the world is important for you to set up a healthy boundary. I think in this climate that we live in the world, there's lots of gaslighting out there, even in the media. You might see it on social media, where people say things that might not be true. So truth can be a really important tool for boundary setting, and knowing your truth and knowing the truth can be really helpful for you to set boundaries. The next one that I'd like to talk about is time. If you've ever been in a high stakes conversation or disagreement, you know that sometimes time is the best type of boundary to set up, to give yourself time to evaluate, to know your truth, to set boundaries, to be emotionally ready for a conversation, to come back to a conversation with some renewed hope and spirit. It can be a really, really good boundary tool. And last but not least, and this is probably the hardest one, is people. Because again, as people of God, we're called into community to love our neighbors. And so setting boundaries with people can be really, really difficult. But as you have maybe experienced, sometimes people that don't have healthy boundaries, they can create friction in your life. So people who have experienced abuse or been in a relationship with people who struggle with addiction or control issues know that sometimes those burdens get placed on them in a really unhealthy way. So sometimes we have to set healthy boundaries with people too, in order to love our neighbors. Because sometimes to love our neighbors means to set boundaries. So God has given us so many tools to know how to set up boundaries. And one of the ways that God has done that is that God tells us who God is and who God is not. So in 1 John, God says that God is love and God is not darkness. And that's such a good way to think about how we can set up boundaries of what is me and what is not me, by looking at what God has done in that example. God is love, God is not darkness. So the first question as you go into your week and you start to discern about boundaries and what those look like in your lives, and where maybe you could be setting up some healthy boundaries, is to ask that question: is what am I not? What is me? What is not me? What's my responsibility? What's not my responsibility? To help start the conversation about how to set up some healthy boundaries. Folks, thanks so much for joining us for the Daily Dose. We're so glad that you could join us today. If you're watching on Facebook, be sure to like and share this post. For those of you checking in on YouTube, make sure that you're subscribed so you can stay in touch with what we're doing at Calvary. And for those of you joining on cable access, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We hope you share this with a friend to join you tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us so. Jealous. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I am unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us so. Yeah, he loves. Yeah, he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves. And we are his portion, and he is our prize, drawn to redemption by the grace in his eyes. If grace is an ocean, we're all sinking. So heaven meets earth like a sloppy wet kiss, and my heart turns violently inside of my chest. I don't have time to maintain these regrets when I think about